Founder of Identitrix, and I'm here today to tell you about our identity project and how we're going to change how our digital identities are handled. So, what's happening today? Today, chaos rules our digital identities. Users face regular and increasingly massive data breaches. Look at what happened with Equifax. Not one, not two, but three massive data breaches, which leaked data from over 110 million users and took over 4 months to come to surface. We have data abuse. In the US, companies like Cambridge Analytica are misusing data and have created enormous political turmoil. Finally, we have loss of consent. We have a widespread collection of data without users' consent and a selling of that data without users profiting a single dime. This is a problem. This industry for selling data is in the billions of dollars. On the business side, we have increasingly strict regulations. We have legislation like GDPR and mirror bills in the United Kingdom and California, which say that data handling has to be increasingly sensitive. We have to minimize the amount of data that's collected, and for the data that is collected, it needs to be either anonymized or pseudonymized. Businesses also face increasingly costly and redundant know your customer procedures, like KYC. This means that, when I go sign up for a bank, the first time the bank has to do that procedure. But then, when I sign up for another bank account, or I go rent an apartment, or I go sign up for a job, they have to do the same KYC procedure over and over and over again. This is inefficient. We need to improve this process. Lastly, we have liability. As the data we collect about ourselves for digital businesses becomes increasingly granular, and as attackers become increasingly sophisticated, companies are required to spend more and more money to maintain security for their centralized repositories. Blockchain is positioned to solve this problem. Why? Advanced cryptography drastically increases the difficulty of a successful attack, while decentralization means that data is distributed in users' devices rather than a centralized repository. It also means that the reward for a successful attack is drastically reduced. I only get one person's data if I hack a phone, but if I hack a database, I get maybe 30, 50 million users' data. So let's talk about where the blockchain solutions are today. I think the way a lot of people think about blockchain solutions is that it evolves through waves. The first wave of blockchain, of course, started with Bitcoin. This was the basic definition of a widespread, decentralized consensus protocol. The second wave was started by Ethereum. This is the idea that we could have independently executable programs, smart contracts. There are many different ways for blockchain to evolve, but for today's purpose, we're interested in getting blockchain to market. There aren't many blockchain applications that I use every day other than looking at CoinMarketCap, right? So what does it take to get blockchain to market? We need a way for businesses and identity owners to define transactions between real people, not just wallets. This is where identity protocols come in. Identity protocols offer a way for users to prove who they are, protect their data, and benefit directly from these transactions. This is where Identitrix comes in. Identitrix is seeking to build a secure yet accessible platform for identity and information management. Identitrix provides a fair, decentralized solution to this problem, the problems of self-sovereign identity and sustainable token economy. How does it do this? Well, it does this in 3 parts. The first part is looking at how we think about digital identity. Right now, digital identity is an amorphous blob. It's all treated the same, whether it's your name or the fact that you liked a puppy last week on Facebook. However, we need to change that. The second way is how we handle data, and this is done through technology. The third way is thinking about how data is exchanged, and this is done through our institutions. So I'm going to give an overview of this. Let's look at first how we think about digital identity. Right now, we think about it as just data. But Identitrix starts from a framework, and this structures how we think about data, this structures things like a sustainable token economy, and this structures user control. In the Identrix framework, we first split data into state descriptors and behavioral descriptors, or as we call it, primary and auxiliary data. Under this framework, state descriptors or primary data describe something about you, like your name, your address, your date of birth. Behavioral descriptors or auxiliary data describes something about what you do. This could be your transaction history or your preferences on the app. Finally, we also further subdivide primary data based on transaction needs. Not every transaction is the same, and we recognize that. So we divide it into type 1 and type 2 based on whether it's necessary or not needed or provides value to the service provider. And this makes sense. Users should be able to choose which of primary 1, primary 2, and auxiliary data they need to show. And moreover, users should be able to monetize this data and value it differently. It's not all worth the same to either users or companies. So I have a little schematic about our Identrix Smart Identity framework. Next, we have our technology solution. And this is how we handle identity. Identrix does this first by using the Hyperledger Development Kit, or Hyperledger Fabric, in order to reach the widespread consensus. Hyperledger Developer, just a brief introduction to it, is supported by the Linux Foundation. Seeing someone clapping, so I'm assuming there's some Linux Foundation people here. So what this provides is a default set of infrastructure procedures, such as simplified Byzantine tolerance for consensus and Apache Kafka for ordering. What Identrix does on top of this is add its design specifications. It also adds extra layers of cryptography for managing information. These include zero-knowledge proofs, which we just concluded the last presentation with, and temporary pseudonymous accounts, which de-link how users spend from their transactions. This means that if someone else looks at the blockchain, unlike Bitcoin, unlike Ethereum, I can't tell who that transaction was spent unless I have that person's consent. So let's look at how people engage with Identrix. We have a 4-step approach right here for registration. So first, users generate an identity wallet. This is the initial public-private key pair. This is what you do for Bitcoin or Ethereum or Quantum, but what we distinguish is that this wallet is expandable. This wallet can be expanded to hold data about yourself, and for our certificate program, it can be expanded to include certificates, which prove the validity of your data or point to transactions which refer to the identity owner. In the second step, the identity wallet formally joins the Identrix network. It does this by going to a membership service provider, which registers a link between the public address of the wallet to the blockchain. It also returns a certificate to show that this wallet is valid. In the third step, a user goes to what we call a service provider, any business that requires data in order to provide a service or a good to a user. Now, under the traditional model, a user can just present all their data, the service provider collects it, and the service is rendered. And there are users that do value this process. But we also provide a streamlined process to hide this data. In this process, users go to a third-party authenticator for a validation, authentication, and attestation. The authenticator is paid to provide a certificate which the user can present to the service provider rather than their own data. This is useful because we can do things like prove our age is over 21 by giving this certificate, rather than saying, my birth date is exactly this date. Finally, the service provider can check the validity of the certificate, right? This is just a digital signature, and accept this transaction, write it to the blockchain, and render the service. So that's the process for registration. This is like an overview. Let's make it a little bit more concrete with a demo. So we're going to walk through the use case of a smart hotel. So right now, we're following Bob, who wants to book a room in a smart hotel and be smart about it. He wants to protect his identity. So Bob is first going to take a picture of a QR code that's presented in the hotel's lobby. Upon taking the data from the QR code, his phone, either in the Identrix app or the hotel's D-app, fills out his data automatically. Bob now has to choose whether he wants to show or hide his data. For primary 1 data, as we said before, this is data that's necessary. He pays to hide his data, but shows his data by default. For primary to and auxiliary data, he makes the choice again. He can either hide it or show it. What then happens if Bob chooses to hide his data is he goes to the authenticator who generates a certificate for him. As we can see here, once the data is validated, Bob returns with the certificate, presents it to the service provider, and the service provider knows that he's a valid person. It writes the transaction to the blockchain, and finally, it releases his keys from the node. So that's one aspect about how we handle data. But I mentioned something else, which is about our institutions for handling data. Right now, data is sold, exchanged through backdoor networks. You contract with people like SurveyMonkey or Amazon or Google to buy users' data without their consent. What Identrix wants to do also is create a data marketplace. We call this the Identrix Smart Identity Marketplace. So, in the example of Bob goes to the Identrix Marketplace and sees that a car sharing service is interested in buying users' data. Instead of buying it from SurveyMonkey, it's going to buy it from Bob directly. Bob, seeing a chance to monetize his data, is now going to release it. So he gets paid for his primary 1 data, he gets paid for his primary 2 data, and he gets paid for his auxiliary data. But important to emphasize here is that Bob can choose what of his primary 1 data release, what of his primary 2 data is released, and what of his auxiliary data is released. Moreover, this data marketplace is unprecedented because this data is authenticated. If you go to someone like SurveyMonkey or Google, this data is either coming from web scrapers or it's coming from surveys from volunteers. That's not authenticated data. That's just random data from the internet. But this, you're getting the data directly from users, and you're paying them directly for it, and that's why it's of higher value. All right, so let's talk about tech now, the demo of them. So Identrix builds itself on Hyperledger Fabric. Why is this? Well, first, Hyperledger is a permissioned blockchain. This allows us to know who we're admitting into our network. Second, Hyperledger offers economically feasible transactions per second. If we look at the benchmarks right now, Bitcoin has around a 7 transactions per second rate. Ethereum is around 15. And although hybrid chains are trying to improve this transaction rate, they're never going to get to the industry benchmark. And that is 40,000 transactions per second. That's what Visa and MasterCard do. Hyperledger right now is at 3,500 transactions per second, with a 100,000 transactions per second target by 2020. I'm putting my eggs in that bucket because that's a lot closer to what is needed in order to actually do transactions on this network. Second, we talked earlier about zero-knowledge proofs and temporary pseudonymous accounts. But Identrix is a protocol. It's not just a standalone DApp on Hyperledger. Why is that? Well, we're adding extra design specification, right? We're not just saying, just throw in some cryptography. We're adding a Dutch auction pricing mechanism for determining authentication fees. We're adding a high-throughput consensus mechanism known as Zizaba. This is an improvement over the simplified Byzantine fault-tolerant consensus mechanism that is found in the standard Hyperledger package. And finally, we're exposing a RESTful API for web developers. I really want to highlight this last point because this is important for making sure that blockchain gets to market. Identrix recognizes that for blockchain to get to market, it needs not only to be innovative, it also needs to be accessible. Exposing a RESTful API means that we have a standard framework for developers to interact with our system. It also means that developers who want to build DApps on our platform don't need to know Hyperledger chain code. They don't need to learn new languages like Solidity or Go. They can use the languages they are familiar with, like JavaScript. So, when we talk about going to market, I think there's a lot of blockchain projects that have tried to literally go directly to market. If we look at someone like Civic, they tried to directly acquire a user base. There are many projects who have tried this, and we know from the fact that there aren't really, none of you really use an identity project right now to protect your identity, that this approach doesn't work. What Identrix has realized that this approach doesn't work because there's a network effect that needs to be addressed. Identity blockchains truly do have wide-ranging appliances. For e-commerce companies, Having shielded transactions allows some users to enter into transactions where they might not necessarily want the details of their transactions to be released. For a smart city, this provides a definition of identity for every single individual. For healthcare, this can create differential privacy for differential access to sensitive information. For financial services, this is know your customer reduction and anti-money laundering laws. There are so many applications, and why hasn't something like this gone to market? Because they try to do users first. Identrix's strategy is to go to companies with existing user bases. We're trying to build partnerships so that when companies and Identrix work together, their users automatically switch over to the DApp system. We've spoken with companies, and we're working to build partnerships with companies with user bases in the hundreds of millions. So, before we wrap up, I also want to give a big thank you to Wanxiang for inviting us here to speak today, and to the Identrix team, who have put in a lot of hard work into this. We're a team of serial entrepreneurs, technical experts, business operators, and most importantly, blockchain believers. So thank you. Thank you to Wanxiang. And if you'd like to learn more about our project, you can join us on WeChat, which we've provided the QR code for here. Okay.